think all of us have been watching the TV, watching the summitry the last few days, so we're all a little bit shaky. But it's been really an exciting few days, an exciting month, exciting year, exciting 2 years. But I should say I grew up in Korea actually in the 50s and 60s, and I worked on Korea on and off for my whole career. And believe me, there's never not an exciting time in Korea. This is just more of the same. But it is really an intriguing issues that we're dealing with. So in Washington, everybody's probably here too is talking about the summit. I'm a little bit different. I'm an economist. I look at North Korea as an economist. Most people look at North Korea through other lenses. But I've also done other work, a lot of work on the nuclear issue. So if you want to ask questions on those things, I can. But tonight I want to focus on the economy because I think it's somewhat of a neglected area. And of course, for me, it's an extremely interesting, important area. When people talk about the summit the last couple of weeks in Washington, at least, they've generally sort of gone, well, who's has the most to win and lose? Who's under the most pressure? Kim and Trump. It's sort of a game between the two, Trump and Kim. Who's going to win this game? I'm a little chagrined with the argument, to tell you the truth, because it seems like all the North Korea experts that I know, I did CSIS, I'm not saying you're some of your people all over them. They tend to, in American North Korea specialists, have been tending to say it's Trump that's under pressure. So I raised my hand, several things, saying, no, I'm not saying Trump's not under pressure. I don't know who's under more pressure, but I, for one, think Kim is under huge pressure. Not relative to Trump, just under huge pressure. That's what I want to try to get across to you. And of course, I don't know that. I'm sitting here in Pittsburgh. What do I know what's going on in Pyongyang? But I try to analyze it through an economics lens. So bear with me. I'm going to try to run through a little bit of economics for you. I don't know if you're economics students or not, but probably you've had some economics, and this is all pretty simple stuff. To tell you the truth. It's also really interesting stuff. The more you get into it, the more interesting. North Korea, especially because there's no numbers, so you don't have to worry about numbers. But you do have to worry about concepts, which is a more fun, interesting area to deal with. Since you don't have to worry about numbers, nobody can prove you're wrong. So I worked at Commerce Department for years, some years, where we did U.S. GDP. Man, we were excruciatingly careful about everything. Ever we mentioned anything, any number, everybody would pounce on us. So one of y'all might ask me, what's North Korea GDP? I can give it to you, no problem. $32.8 billion, no problem. Nobody's going to challenge me. So in a lot of ways, it's easy to do North Korea, but it's a little bit easy to get lazy as well. So it's hard for a North Korean analysts to stay focused on what they're doing. And that's what I'm afraid people are getting off focus these days. If they're studying Trump, they're not studying Kim. We all want to study Trump, but if your job is to study Kim, study Kim. That's kind of where I'm going. So in the economy, if you look at North Korea's economy, just some general aspects of it, maybe you already know. It's North Korea, I meant to have a map up here. I don't have a map. I studied international studies and always had maps. So need to get a map here. The little signpost there. Korea's peninsula is shaped like a rabbit, if you look at it. North Korea is a small country, about 24 million people. That's half the size population of South Korea. It's kind of a small Chinese province. I mean, it's not the same as Taiwan, actually. Taiwan is a small Chinese province. In its world, it's sitting next to giants. So that's one thing to keep. Even South Korea, economically, is a giant compared to North Korea. So that's one thing to keep in mind. It's an extremely poor country. One of the poorest in the world. If you rank it, look, CIA's a fact book, you can look at GDP per capita. Believe me, they don't know what it is, but they put it down around Sudan level, about number 200 or so, way down. And that's probably roughly accurate. So it's an extremely poor country. Why is it so poor? When we look at the GDP, the production, the country's production, really anybody's production, we create something called a production function. The inputs that go into the output. So we have this thing we call factors of production, the main inputs into production for a country. The factors of production are, you may remember from high school, what? Land, natural resources, labor, and capital. A lot of times we don't talk about land, we just call labor, land, labor, labor and capital are the main inputs. So let's look at North Korea. It's poor because it has weak inputs, right? No, that's what a lot of people think. And that's what a lot of policy people sort of, I think, make a mistake. They think North Korea needs more inputs. But if you look at them, let's look at capital. Capital comes in two different types, human capital and physical capital. Physical capital, one thing North Korea is, given its income level, pretty good at. You look at it, you see all these factories all over the place, right? Where do the factories come from? A lot of them were given to it. Eastern Europe, Soviet Union, China, Korea, even us. Everybody's given North Korea a lot of stuff over the years. Moreover, their planned economy was good at one thing, it's producing capital, machinery. The Soviet Union did that. North Korea's done that pretty well. So they have a lot of physical capital for output. Human capital is extremely good per unit of that. They're all educated, they're all literate. So an extremely poor country, level of Sudan, everybody's literate. Wow, that's a huge difference. In America, no, they're not all literate. North Korea would have one of the highest literacy rates on par with us, right? But their income per that level of human capital is terrible. You could go through the list of all the things, all the inputs they have. Their natural resources are superb. South Korea has nothing. North Korea has lots of, like Pittsburgh, has lots of iron and steel, lots of lead and zinc, lots of rare earths, uranium. It's got that. It's got lots of coal. It's got lots of hydroelectric potential and even power. It's in a great spot next to rich South Korea, super rich Japan, and growingly rich, is that a word? China, right? A perfect location if you want to grow. Real estate people would say, wow, this is fine. So when Trump says North Korea has a lot of potential, yes, no doubt about it. They could be rich. They should be rich. What's the problem? Second area I want to talk about is the structure of the economy. Real briefly. We probably all know it's kind of a socialist economy. What we used to call, we still do call a command economy. So economy is basically the two different types. There's a market economy that we all know of very well, money-driven economy. The whole world is a money-driven economy. Everybody is, except one, North Korea. North Korea, problem with North Korea, its command economy gets broken down. So even the command economy does create some productivity. You have all these assets. What do you get out of it? That's a residual. You can sort of measure the productivity of the country. The Soviet Union was actually fairly productive. North Korea is terribly productive. Why? Well, there's a, I don't think I'll take time. I have some little graphs we can look at later. But the basic problem is in all these command economies, Soviet Union, China, a lot of them in Eastern Europe, they all fail because the command nature of the economy. You have a central plan, a government that tells everybody kind of what to do. And they reward people based on rations, not money. Everybody gets kind of the same amount. So at some level, they can be successful. As I say, they're good at making machines. But they're not good at growing food, and every one of them has had a huge famine. Soviet Union, China, North Korea had a big famine in the mid-1990s. That wrecked their command economy because the command economy requires the government to give out rations, say food rations. They couldn't give them out. So So everybody either died, 1 million people died, the rest of them just went off and started trading, bartering. The market economy naturally starts to grow, and they start using North Korean money, which was around but didn't mean anything. Very quickly, that money, the North Korean government printed way too much of it, and they had huge inflation. That was in Kim Jong-un's father's days. Huge inflation, disastrous monetary. They've moved on from there. So now they have this sort of, the command economy hasn't gone away. I think about a third of the people in this command economy, a third of the people in the market economy, a third of the people in huge collectives in agriculture. So think of those three pieces. Now, in the command economy, people are paid, there's sort of a schedule, like a USGS schedule, payment system. People get paid about 3,500 won per month. Is that a lot? Well,
No.
You got to know what a won is worth, right? But
I know what it's worth.
you know, what's it worth?
Don't they usually go for like 8,000 won to the dollar?
Exactly. But that's in the market economy. So the lady in the textile mill, the state mill in Pyongyang, she gets 3,500 won per month. A taxi ride costs $2 US. You can get $1. There's a market for dollars. It's amazing. It's very liberal in a lot of ways. But the dollar is going to cost, like you said, 8,000 won. 16,000 won to ride a taxi, and 3,000 won a month's income. That's ridiculous. Point is, she doesn't really need the taxi. She doesn't need the money at all. She can get a ration. Part of her, food and almost everything is free, so she doesn't need the money. But you can imagine what the free food is like, the free apartment is like, the free electricity, everything is free. You kind of get what you pay for. That's that old state economy. Her sister might be working now in a Chinese-invested textile mill, doing the same work. She might be making 300,000 won a month, 100 times her sister. Wow. That sister doesn't get any of the perks. So maybe who's better off? More and more the market lady is better off. The state side of this equation, think about it, is all the party people, all the educated people, all the school teachers. So if you're teaching a class, you're getting 3,500 won. The kids in your class, their parents might be in the marketplace doing ordinary kind of work, getting a lot more money to do. How's the teacher going to ride a taxi or get a cell phone? A lot of cell phones. They want a cell phone, like we all do. She has to teach the little kid privately. So the state side of the economy is privatizing like crazy. But that's killing the state. It's corruption, right? Everybody doing on the side work that they're doing. This is going on in tremendous speed now in the last few years with Kim Jong-un. It's growing, so the market economy is growing, the state economy is with it. People ask me how they're doing, how's the economy? I have to balance this too. When I balance them, I just end up saying, well, it's probably growing a little. But what I really mean to be saying is that there's huge tension growing between these two sides. And if you're in the regime, if you're Kim, this is trouble. Now we add to that this sanctions business. Since I was never much a believer in the sanctions, I really didn't like them much until 2016. The sanctions, U.S. imposed sanctions on nuclear stuff. I'm not against them, but they just didn't seem to be doing it. Trade with China was soaring in 2016. 2016, North Korea did nuclear tests, missile tests, and it did much more in 2017. China finally jumped on board the UN sanctions in a really big way. They're, here's some of the graphs. So this is my favorite one back in the good old times. It's favorite because here's President Moon, what's in his hand? $100 Benjamin, right? What is those stuff for for Kim Jong-un to be laughing, saying, number one, I want one of those. Wow, think of his Communist Party cadre. I was worried for him when he went back to so here's the trade with China. Let's talk about. So up to 2016, the trade is doing fine with all the sanctions. 2017, 2018, up to January of 2019, it's just totally dropped. North Korean exports to China are down 90%. And China is by far their biggest, almost only trade. So North Korea is officially not earning almost anything. It's still importing some. They talk about self-reliance, but there are plenty of things they really got to import. And those things they've got to import are dropping. So it's no surprise to me, Kim goes to Hanoi, what's on his agenda? What did he tell Trump? Got to get sanctions relief. Everything else that they've been working on falls, peace treaty, I never paid much attention to the peace treaty. Sanctions, wow, they're hurting. Of course, there's a lot of smuggling going on, get stuff going around in the private side. Even that's worse for Kim, because the private side is smuggling. The state side has a harder time dealing with official Chinese customs. So I think it's excruciating painful. Now, why did my speculation on the summit itself? I don't know what happened. It seemed like they were about ready to make some low-level deal, a modest deal, work that out. I'm thinking Kim saw the modest deal, and I'm thinking he said, this isn't enough. Kim Gong-san, whatever, this is not going to help. This kind of $1 billion, $100 million loss a year. Not going to help me. I need something bigger. So I'm imagining that he might have said, okay, let's tweak. Let's see if we can get something bigger out of Trump. And I think they kind of tried to trick. They said, let's see if he can stop humanitarian sanctions. Get those opened up. Well, the problem is all the sanctions up to here had a humanitarian clause in it. You can't hurt the worker. Oh. So you can import North Korean coal if you're helping the worker. Well, of course you are. So of course everybody was buying. That's why they were so effective. 2016 to 17, they added this humanitarian. China did, Russia did. Took that out. So from then on, it's basically you can't import anything. Kim tried to get that taken off. Trump, to his credit, recognized that and said, no, that's all the sanctions. Literally not all the sanctions, but it's all the important. So Kim goes back home. He's still on the train, maybe? I don't know. Is he back home yet? I don't know. But he's got a long trade line to sit there and work on his speech that he should give next month to the budget meeting that they have. This is a year ago, he gave a very famous speech. He said, economy first. Nukes, we finished with that. We're going to focus on the economy. Y'all are all going to be fine. And the people have been very optimistic ever since then. Very optimistic. Now he has to go back there. They all know what happened in Hanoi, I'm sure. What's he going to say? I think this is big pressure. Now, because of that, I'm hopeful. And I'm very hopeful that our side, we have a big role to play. That we can, I think the engagement is very important at the working level up. Hopefully we can get in there and keep engaging. I think Kim has this huge problem with the, did I slip on something? With the, it doesn't matter, with this dual economy problem. I think his problems are mostly internal. If we can do something to help with that internal problem, I have some ideas how we could do that and start working at that lower level. Otherwise, Kim has made, I think, a huge mistake that they'll live to. Maybe he won't live to. Okay. Sorry, I probably went over. It's okay.
Great. Thank you so much. I want to thank, first of all, the University of Pittsburgh Asian Studies Center and Professor Shin for inviting me here today to give this talk. It's a pleasure to be here in front of you all and explain a little bit more about Korea. So what I want to do first, so Bill gave a very good lecture on the background of economics for North Korea, and I want to give a little background on the politics and the history before we get started and talk about the summitry stuff that came up just this week. So to start, I want to see. Okay, is that good? Okay. All right, so I just want to talk about the worldview, the Korean worldview. I think there are ultimately two things that have shaped the Korean worldview. One is the dynamics of peace that have gone back centuries. Korea, the Korean Peninsula, was centuries ago was a fundamental place for exchanges between China, Russia, and Japan. It was also an important crossroads for trade and socio-political economic exchanges. One example of this is the fact that Buddhism spread from India through China to the Korean Peninsula and then on to Japan. The Confucian religion, or Confucianism, was also very important in this region, and that also spread through the Korean Peninsula. So this was an important dynamic, a phenomenon that had a very important historical legacy in the region. The Korean Peninsula has also been fundamentally shaped by conflict. There have been numerous invasions, wars, and conflicts that have taken place on the Korean territory or over control of Korea over centuries. And this includes Japanese and Chinese invasions in the 16th and 17th century. It includes the Sino-Japanese War in the early 19th century, and then also the Russo-Japanese War in the 20th century, and of course the Japanese colonization of Korea in the early 20th century as well. We also saw the division of the two Koreas after World War II in 1945, and the Korean War from 1950 to 1953. I think there are two fundamental events that helped shape the Korean worldview and still shape the Korean worldview in the modern day. And one is the Japanese colonization of Korea. This has a fundamental impact on the way that Koreans think about themselves, their history, and their nation. And it draws back to a lot of national sentiment that comes up in Korea from time to time, even in the present day. And so, as we know, I think some of you are probably familiar with the history of this, but Koreans still have a lot of frustration, a lot of resentment, a lot of anger because of this time period in history. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that there were fundamental things that happened on the Korean Peninsula during this time period. There was some industrialization that happened because the Japanese were mobilizing the country, the peninsula, for help with their war efforts. So there was a foundation of some industrial factories and other things that were put into place in the Korean Peninsula, particularly in the northern part of the peninsula during this time period, even though it was a terrible time for the people themselves. So after 1945, there was a division of the two Koreas. In the north, of course, we know that the territory was occupied. Sorry, is that the wrong? So we know that the two Koreas were divided. In the northern half of Korea, it was occupied by communist forces under Soviet control, and then in the southern part of Korea, the United States occupied the territory and helped set up the Korean government in the south that was headed by Lee Seung-man. And then in the north, it was a government that was headed by Kim Il-sung, the original founder of North Korea. I think that fundamentally the division of the two Koreas set in place a sort of dynamics that to this day continue to have a great effect on what happens in the East Asian region. The two Koreas were fundamentally opposed to each other after the division of Korea, and I think they started to form their own identities in opposition to each other, and that had a great effect for the historical process that happened after the division. And to this day, the two Koreas, I think, still think in terms of opposites of each other. And in the north, there was a drive to industrialize the country and further develop the country under the communist system. And in the south, of course, they turned to economic development under a capitalist model, as was described by Bill. But you see in the years following that there was quite a significant gap that grew between the two Koreas, especially starting in the 1960s. There was a significant gap and growth development that happened in South Korea. I think in part this happened for a lot of different reasons. There was land reform that happened in South Korea. There was economic development aid that came from the United States. There was also an economic aid package that came from Japan after normalization of relations with Japan in the 1960s. There was Park Chung-hee, who was the authoritarian ruler of South Korea, who put into place an economic development plan, but ultimately started industrializing the country to an even greater degree with moving toward an export-led economy and developing industries inside South Korea that would eventually lead to greater development later on. Here's another picture of sort of the same thing. You can see the wide gap between the two Koreas. And South Korea now depends very, very heavily on export, the export industry that's very famous for semiconductors, cars, and other heavy industries that it's developed over decades. Whereas North Korea, you can see that the export industries are very much, almost non-existent, as Bill mentioned, to this day. And then, of course, we see the development of a dictatorship, a totalitarian dictatorship in North Korea, with the subsequent three leaders, Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, and Kim Jong-un. And then in South Korea, we have authoritarian leaders who took power for several decades but were overturned in the 1980s with a democracy movement that ultimately led to a greater democratization of South Korea and greater growth in the country as a result. So why did this happen? I think one fundamental reason is because of the U.S.-South Korea alliance. Of course, there are other factors, economic factors, security factors that probably added to South Korea's growth, but the alliance was an important factor. And just to highlight the differences between what South Korea looked like in the 1950s and the present day, South Korea's GDP in 1953 was 40.9 million. It is now
Sorry.
So for me, I think China can continue to play a constructive role by keeping United Nations sanctions in place until there actually really is movement on dismantlement of North Korea's nuclear weapons program. If we look at the United Nations Security Council resolutions, as we talked about when Bill first started talking, the majority of United Nations Security Council resolutions up until 2016 were on non-transfer, non-proliferation issues, making sure the materials that North Korea was using to build its nuclear weapons program were not getting into the country, but those weren't significantly effective until later on when we started doing the sectoral sanctions, including preventing North Korea from exporting coal, from exporting rare earth minerals, other iron ore, all of those things, seafood. And so keeping those sectoral sanctions in place for now, I think, would be important, and a big part of that is Chinese implementation and enforcement of United Nations sanctions, because as we've mentioned, I think 90% of North Korea's external trade or greater is with China. So China is a huge factor in the enforcement. So if it can continue to do that until there's movement on denuclearization, I think that would be great. And I think China can also continue to encourage North Korea to engage in reforms domestically. When Kim Jong-il visited China back in 2011, the Chinese took him to a bunch of places inside China that were developing rapidly economically, and they showed him factories and said, this is what you guys need to do. You need to start opening up your economy like China has opened up, or China has reformed. The North Koreans, of course, did not end up doing that under Kim Jong-il, but under Kim Jong-un, if he really truly is a different kind of young leader that's more open to risk-taking and more open to reform measures, then the Chinese should push harder, should push him to visit more places in China, visit more places in Vietnam, visit more places that could serve as a model for North Korean development. Now, the North Koreans won't like that because they think of themselves as unique and they think they don't have to follow anybody else's model. But the more that they can be shown a different path, even one that may not be entirely 100% fitting for them, but could give them different ideas of how they can develop their own economy, the command economy plus integrating the market economy together, I think that would be the best role that China could play in this environment.
I mean, I don't have all that much more to add than what's been said, but I would just reinforce that I don't think international sanctions matter at all from unless China is on board with them. They're literally completely ineffective without Beijing's cooperation. And we've, and as Bill has highlighted, we've seen a sea change in Beijing's approach to the sanctions, finally really applying them in a very serious way. And it's interesting to me. It also signifies a sort of change of attitude on the part of Beijing, and a change of sort of its priorities about North Korea. For many years we tried to convince our Chinese friends that the main priority on the peninsula was denuclearization. For the Chinese, for many years, it was about their priority was maintaining political stability on the peninsula, and we tried to convince them that you couldn't have political stability without denuclearization. And I think maybe this change in policy is a reflection of their change in attitude about priorities.
It may have been related also to the killing of Chiang Kai-shek and the brother,
Right.
half-brother, both of them
Right.
Chinese.
Right. I think that China's gotten fed up
Thinking
with
it's getting unstable,
Right.
killing him.
Right. I think that Beijing's gotten fed up with the brinksmanship of the North Korean regime, and its behavior. The fact that in the past there was some deference paid to Beijing on the part of North Korean leaders, and that seems to have gone by the wayside. And China's felt that it's lost some face with the North Korean regime of late. So I think all these sort of play into the change of attitude.
Just one last thing. I emphasized the hydrogen bomb explosion, and what was the month of that? October 20th.
Yes.
The last big nuclear test. It was we had a earthquake here in Virginia. It was about the same scale, about 100 miles away from us. And it rattled Washington like nobody's business. Were you there? And it just shook everything. Scary. We never got used to earthquakes. That nuclear explosion was about the same. And 100 miles away from it is well into Changchun, big, huge Chinese city. So Changchun is one of it's like the fourth biggest city, I think. It's shaking like crazy because of a North Korean nuclear test. I think that just is the last straw.
Looking up the population here, if I could find it.
Changchun. Oh, you're Actually, I'm thinking Shenyang, but Shenyang and Changchun are both big cities.
Well, I'll come up with that in a moment. Let's open this up to, first of all, thank you for your answers to my questions. Let's open this up to the audience. Questions from the audience, please.
I got a question about I don't know if you have a estimation that how possible that the final agreement can be achieved like within 2 years before Donald Trump stepped in, and is it what they and we suppose that if Donald Trump loses the election on 2020, and how possible the new government, the Democratic government, is gonna cancel the agreement, or do some change to the agreement, or just continue the agreement. I mean, do you have any estimation about this?
I mean, I'm pessimistic about any agreement happening now. I really am. I think that President Trump's now going to be really preoccupied with domestic problems. They're just starting to heat up. There's all kinds of other issues that's going to preoccupy him. I don't know whether he's able now to reverse course and allow better working level, behind the scenes work negotiations to occur with our partners and with North Korean counterparts that would again sort of lay the groundwork for a real significant agreement. So if he's going to stick with the summitry model, I'm even more pessimistic. I think a telling sign will be if he does allow better working working level engagement on this, then that to me will signal that there's still a pulse to the possibility of an agreement of some sort. And as for a Democratic administration coming in and then sort of undoing an agreement that President Trump might reach, I don't think that would be likely unless the agreement was really a bad one. But I think that's something that would be very fundamentally getting at the denuclearization of North Korea would be something successive Democratic administration.
So I think on this point that the window of time is closing if we expect that President Trump won't be reelected, and things are not looking good for him right now. And I think that because of that, because we see a limited window of time, a lot of people were trying to tell the North Koreans, look, this is your one and only chance. If you really want to have a deal, you've got to put up some more efforts for denuclearization and really be serious about this, because this could be your only chance. Because President Trump is one of the only U.S. presidents that we can think of in modern history who would actually do a crazy deal like this with the North Koreans, give up as much as they want they want us to give up. And so that was something that people were trying very hard to tell the North Koreans. But whether or not they listen to that is one thing. And I think that it's completely right. We are looking at a U.S. president who's going to be very distracted by domestic issues. The Cohen testimony clearly was disturbing to him. He tweeted about it even in the midst of the summit when he should have been all focused on the summit itself. He was probably watching from Vietnam parts of the testimony. And so I think that the domestic stuff will play a very big part in how President Trump decides to focus or not on continuing the continuing Korea issue. And it will be a good unintended consequence if the working level officials are able to get more authority to make more decisions as a consequence of the failure of this Hanoi summit. I think that would be a great thing. And that ultimately maybe there could be another summit towards the end of President Trump's term that could lead to a peace deal or not, a greater movement towards denuclearization. But I see the window of time closing and the opportunities closing rather than opening. Whereas I think in the lead up to Hanoi, the opportunities were actually increasing, and there was more opportunity for some sort of deal to happen. Although many of us, including myself, were very afraid that President Trump was going to make a deal that was not good for the United States and the allies. But it ended up coming out completely opposite. So, but yeah, I think there's things that will be distracting for President Trump in the future.
So this is the kind of talk I really sort of don't think that we're competent. We're North Korea people. What do we know about? To me, the issue is Kim. The ball to me is in Kim's court, no question about it. I don't think any U.S. president right now would behave much differently than Trump now that the ball is, now that they've had this. I think the U.S. is working really hard to have the working groups. I can't believe you're saying, what are we doing to constrain? It's the North Koreans that are not doing the work. There may be some tweaks, and there are tweaks that we need to work on. I'm sure we're working on it. But I think, to me, as we said, as long as the Chinese are on board with these sanctions, North Korea is in trouble. They might be able to eke it out for years, who knows? Maybe months, maybe tomorrow. But to me, it's very squarely in their court. And we should stop analyzing our own naval and analyze them.
Thank you.
How significant do you think the South Korean leader will be as we move on from this point, since they
That's a
played
really
rather
good question.
important role up to this point?
Because President Moon has put a lot at stake on this. And he's, in a way, the loser of this non-happening progress. But even then, I think we're looking at this one event that none of us had huge expectations. Some people sort of raised the bar really high to a comical level. Oh, they're going to, no, I mean, they're not going to give away their nuclear weapons. Nobody gives away nuclear weapons. A lot of stuff has to go on to persuade them, I think, basically to make them afraid of their own nuclear weapons. But the loser right now looks like President Moon, because he's invested his, remember, he has a 5-year term, one term. It's half over now, right? And he's put so much into this, you know, what's his legacy? He's going to be worried. Now, I do think, though, that there are plenty of areas that they can be working on inside this working group, keep the momentum going. Kaesong's not open anytime soon. Kumgong-san could still be a deal. You know, they could still work out projects. I suspect our government will be. The deal that they were close to making was a pretty good one for South Korea, I think. I don't know exactly, but I think it was a pretty good one. And it wasn't great for Kim Jong-un was the problem. It wasn't enough for him. So, you know, tweaking that around a little bit, you know, I think he's going to be pushing hard for that. But their government and our government are really in close sync on this. Trump is on the phone with Moon immediately, and they're talking about it. I'm not. The divide is between Korea and Japan, as he says, but Japan is playing kind of an outlier role here, as it should. It doesn't really have that much to do with it. So I'm not near that up. I quite agree 2 years is not going to be a huge degree. But that's the kind of unrealistic expectation that if we set those kind of course we're going to fail. Of course. But we shouldn't do that. We don't need to do that. You know, just keeping them, stopping their testing is a pretty darn good deal. They can't really threaten us on an ICBM until they further develop it. And right now I can't see any way they can test an ICBM without China smashing them in the face. I think, and I don't think they're going to. So I think right now Kim is the one in a box. And it's a very tough situation he's in. We've got to recognize that and try to find find a way for him to get out of this box. That can be the crux of the problem.
Lisa, what's your view?
Yes, I think Moon Jae-in will be very anxious to restart negotiations as soon as possible. He's in a very tight spot politically because, as Bill mentioned, he's put all of his eggs in one basket, which is basically the improvement of North Korea-South Korea relations, inter-Korean economic projects, and also, peace. This peace legacy that he wants to see happen under his presidency.
That's economic trouble. His economy is going to be
right. So when he ran for president, when Moon Jae-in ran for president, he campaigned on basically two platforms. One was economic reform and improvement of the economy, and the other was improvement of inter-Korean relations and peace with North Korea. And he basically has put all his political eggs in the basket with North Korea and has not been able to do much on the domestic front in terms of the economy. And South Korean people are very unhappy about that. They want progress to happen on the economy, and they're starting to lose interest on North Korea. So if he doesn't do well on that front, he's going to be in trouble because he doesn't have anything to show now for his presidency. So he's going to be pushing very hard to be a moderator between the United States and North Korea going forward, like he was before the Singapore summit and before Hanoi. And I think that he'll continue to do that. And the South Koreans will continue to try to push for economic cooperation just with the North, even without a big deal with the United States. But they'll try to get exemptions from United Nations Security Council resolutions with tacit U.S. support. And I think that's how he'll push forward, at least in the short term.
So the only thing I would add is that I think in the wake of this summit meeting in Hanoi, I get the sense that we're not really sure where the pendulum's going to swing next. I mean, are we going to continue? Is there going to continue to be enough momentum toward engagement that we swing that way? In which case, I think Moon Jae-in is probably still in a pretty good position. Will be influential in that. If the pendulum, if the summit signifies the end of that arc, and we're going to be swinging back toward pressure, then he's going to be as sidelined as Prime Minister Abe's been, and Abe will be the one that will be much more important in this whole trend.
Yes, Shane.
I have many questions, but
You only get to ask one.
I want to pose this question to Mr. Polish. When I heard the Japan was relieved after knowing about the result of the summit I could understand, and even especially after learning what was on the table, I could understand why Japan felt relieved. But what was surprising or interesting to me was that Prime Minister Abe said, now it's time to go to Korea.
Where did that? I want to go.
So could you tell us a little bit more about why he said that and why he meant that, why he meant by saying that?
Well, I've always felt that that after there would be a Trump-Kim summit, that that Abe would naturally want to have a summit of his own, and this is partly to do with with dealing with this perception of being sidelined in this whole process. That would be one way to try to sort of climb back in a very high-profile way. So I think that's I think that's a large part of it. The other thing is, again, I think he has to make some progress on the abductee issue, and I think a summit could provide that kind of venue for that. I think it's quite difficult. I think that there's, to some degree, it's unrealistic to think that under the current circumstances, some sort of breakthrough or agreement to a process on resolving the abductee issue would actually happen. I think that there isn't. Why would Kim Jong-un want to meet with the Prime Minister of Japan and just talk about abductee issues at this point? There's just nothing there. There's nothing,
But this is kind of an interesting thought. I hadn't thought of it this way, that given there's not going to be a Kim Trump summit soon, probably not going to go to South Korea anytime soon.
Right.
Xi Jinping maybe. But it is sort of, what has not happened? Russia, maybe Abe, and maybe he could be right. Let's squeeze in something to get the ball rolling.
Right.
I don't mean abductees, but just money, something.
But I think the problem is that for Japan, the priority would be in that situation abductees, and so I think that would sort of be, that would suck all the oxygen out of the other issues that they need to talk about.
Joe?
I'm wondering if you could sort of address a very broad question. So, there are a lot of references made, I think, quite appropriately, to the fact that, having this sort of 2-year horizon is, probably highly problematic, right? We're setting this very, very high bar, which we're unlikely to reach. And if you look at, a relatively long period, I remember, going all the way back to the Kim Dae-jung era, you sort of have this, this sunshine policy, but yet because we have these democratic systems in place, both in South Korea and also in the US, we just keep getting this waxing and waning, right? There are these moments where we're paying attention to the North Korean issue, and then we ignore it. And so in some ways, regardless of what happens to the current US president, it seems to me that there needs to be continued engagement from the U.S. side, also from, quite frankly, all sides, right? The Koreans, the South Koreans rather, the Japanese, to whatever degree they're going to keep engaged, because this is not something that you're going to solve quickly. So I wonder, what is the sort of sense, at least from the American side of the foreign policy establishment, because you did raise the point that, okay, maybe we need to get to some understanding that let's accept the status quo, and that is to say that North Korea is going to stay as a country, and let's normalize that, and maybe get an embassy there or something. Are we moving, or more people, because of what the current administration is doing, are more people in at least the American side moving to that sort of thinking, and then maybe will they move to the sort of thinking that, okay, yeah, we accepted Pakistan having nukes and India having nukes, can we accept North Korea having nukes as long as they can't actually hit anywhere important? Because the reality is, I don't think they're ever going to give it up, right? Why would the North Koreans give up their nukes? It's some sort of, unless the economic situation can change, as you were speaking about, significantly enough, that would give them some sort of greater assurance, right?
So So that's a great question. And my biggest disappointment, I am disappointed with Hanoi, one big aspect. I thought we were going to open a liaison office. That would be, in the big scheme of things, a huge deal. No other administration got close to it. Talked about it forever. This looked like, I was thinking, my gosh, we might have a U.S. flag flying in Pyongyang next month. Wow, this would be a big deal, big positive deal for us. They could have one in Washington. They have one in New York, so it's not a big deal. But for us to have one, that would give you the continuing, sort of the ambassador. That's what we do with China. That's the way to go. I think probably what happened, I'm just guessing, Kim realized that's something the Americans want. That's not a concession. You know, they're not giving me one. I should get something for it. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that's why what I mean by tweaking the deal, so that I've been suggesting, for example, that we eliminate our sanctions on American travel to North Korea. I think that was about to happen. That's not a UN sanction, so that would be relatively easy to do. So any of y'all could, I can't because, well, you could go. You know, a year ago you could go, now you can't go. You can get a special thing. I think Americans should go there. I think, you know, all the funny talk about a Trump hotel, you know. Yes, exactly. There should be a Trump, they can go see. That's the kind of building the relationship that I still hope can happen. But you're exactly right. Something has to happen that goes beyond each presidential term. Even more really in South Korea. But because theirs is more jarring, that 5-year limit. We made 4 years or 4 years. Anyway, I'm quite agree. On the nuke side, I beg to differ because I think they can do away with their own nukes once they realize the mechanics, the logistics, the security problem of having a nuclear weapon in your backyard are huge. The cost is huge, and you're just making yourself a target for a superpower. Why do you want to do that? 199 countries don't do that, even though they could. Why is North Korea so good? I think there is a lane here for North Korea to voluntarily decide this is not working. And it would, you know, they're not close to that yet. I'm not naive. But to me, that's kind of that's the other part of the maximum pressure. Oh, by the way, if you have nukes, you're on our preemptive strike list, just in case. We have to protect ourselves. We've got something pointing at you, and our button is bigger than yours. You know, that kind of talk. That's, I think, what you need to tell them. Your button didn't work. Anyway.
So on your question about recognizing North Korea as a de facto nuclear weapons state, that's a huge debate inside Washington, D.C. There's arms control people who say that we should just recognize North Korea as having nuclear weapons and then try to get them to disarm over time, like step by step, and a disarmament agreement that would lead to greater dismantlement of nuclear weapons could be a positive process in the long run, but they just want us to get to the first step. That's what a lot of arms control people will argue. I think there's a lot of regional experts who are very afraid of that because they think that North Korea will never agree to give up its nuclear weapons and they'll just trick us by basically engaging in superficial steps for disarmament, but putting everything to the back and backloading all the steps and trying to get concessions all up front instead. And so they're worried about North Korea tricking us into an agreement that won't ultimately last very long, but that will result in North Korea being accepted as a nuclear weapons state. And so how do you reverse that once that happens? You can't reverse the acceptance of North Korea as a nuclear weapons state. And so there are people who are afraid of that and afraid of the effect that would have both on the U.S. alliance, U.S.-South Korea alliance, and on the impact that it would have for keeping U.S. troops in the region also. And then ultimately, once you start to disarm North Korea, and if you agree to a peace declaration or a peace treaty, there's all of those interim steps that could ultimately have an impact on the alliance relations as well. So there are lots of dynamics that come into play when you talk about this. I tend to be more of the pessimistic type when it comes to believing whether or not North Korea will actually disarm. in the long run. And I think that they will try to get as many concessions as they can up front because that's in their national interest, and that's what they've been doing for decades. And then there are, other people within DC on the more liberal side who believe that we should trust North Korea, and the start of a relationship with North Korea is to start trusting them. And once you remove that distrust in the relationship, then North Korea will eventually open up. So you build a relationship first, and then you expect them to disarm, and then you get a peace treaty with them. So it depends on what perspective you're looking at. There are optimistic people, and there are very pessimistic people, and there are people in the middle. It's a big spectrum in DC.
Okay, I'm sorry we've run out of time for this evening's event. So if you could please join me in a round of applause for the speakers. And on behalf of the Asian Studies Center, I'd like to present each of you with a tool for writing your next report.